Perfect. So thank you. Good evening, everybody. And sorry that I have to bother you in English and can't speak wonderful Italian. And I've just been listening in, and conference in Italian is so much more charming than in English. So I envy you for that. First, thanks for the invitation. Thanks for having me here. Thanks for being here. And I was actually listening into some of the presentations previously I've heard of yesterday. The beginning of the event was more or less started by Undersecretary Putti, who was very, very compelling about the vision of Italy to be a much more digitally connected country. And I think that's really one of the key points here that we should discuss. And as you said, I'll move a little bit away from, where are we now, 6G already? That went really fast. I worked in the telecoms industry a couple of years ago, and we were still at 3, 4G. Anyway, so amazing how fast the time moves on. I will not talk about the infrastructure. I will not talk about 5G and 6G so much, but I will rather talk about what is happening on the infrastructure, what is happening on the networks, and that's the metaverse. That's our vision of the future internet. I want to talk about partnerships, and many of you, who are representing the telco industry, you are partners. You are partners, obviously today, but also going forward in the metaverse. And then maybe I say a little bit about the rules of the game and the frameworks with which we operate. So let me start. What's the metaverse? If you haven't done it yet, I make a wonderful recommendation after you leave this. Go on YouTube and look up an interview from the year 1995 between Bill Gates and David Letterman. So if you don't know, you know who Bill Gates is. David Letterman is a host of a very famous talk show on American television. And in 1995, Bill Gates tried to explain to David Letterman what the internet is. It's hilarious. It's absolutely hilarious. And I will let you judge what good a job I do if I'm as helpless as poor Bill Gates was at that point. And for Letterman, it was science fiction and absolutely unnecessary. And I don't think it's science fiction, the metaverse. I think it's just the logical evolution of the internet that we know today. And it addresses some of the shortcomings that we have of the internet, which is there's no sense of presence at the moment. You go on your telephone, you're taken away from something. It's not immersive. We are not in it. We just sort of on the outside looking at it. And it's not real. It's the flat earth. It's a two-dimensional world. That's not real. I mean, you guys are real. You're three-dimensional. We want to have a much better reflection of the real world in the digital sphere. And that's what we think the metaverse will bring. And it also means something for us as humans, because it's a much more human interface. What is more natural than maybe in a couple of years, you put your glasses on, you can stay with the people, with the environment around you, but you have additional information that is overlaid and in your conversation, in your interaction with other people. So it's not really that futuristic, the whole thing. And yes, we are at the dawn of the metaverse. We are at the, if I can sort of use the terminology of the internet, we are at the dial-up phase. Do you still remember dial-up? The dial-up phase of the metaverse. But you mentioned I was in Dublin, but I was also in Rotterdam yesterday. The reason why I was in Rotterdam yesterday is because in Rotterdam was the 8th year running, the Immersive Tech Week. 5,000 participants at the Immersive Tech Week with the most amazing use cases of virtual reality, augmented reality, mixed reality, immersive services. I mean, this is really, really happening, and there were some astonishing use cases. And it really brings home that you don't need that much fantasy, that it will really change of how we will communicate with each other, how we will interact with each other, how we will do business, obviously, how we will consume media, how we will consume art, how we will learn, obviously, that's an important one. All these things will change, and these are not just some nerdy niche cases, where some geeks write something and that's interesting. It's real stuff. I mean, there was one example of orthopedic surgeons trying surgery hundreds of times, rehearsing surgery hundreds of times, before for the first time sometimes they work on a patient. I mean, I would prefer that if I'm the patient, that these guys had experienced it before and I'm not the first guinea pig that they cut open. I mean, this is really cutting edge stuff. There's one company that I'm very fond of is BMW. I had the big privilege to be invited to the headquarters of BMW. BMW is designing all their cars virtually. So all the engineers, they live in China, they live in the US, they're in Europe, they're in Munich. The last 7 Series BMW, if you're into cars, the electric 7 Series BMW was exclusively designed in the metaverse and was designed a year faster than any other car that the company had. They market the cars in the metaverse, they do training in the metaverse. So it's astonishing where we are. These are not just, as I said, some niche players. And we don't have to go that far away from that. You know, we don't have to go to Munich. We can stay in Italy. There are some amazing use cases, you know, in the fashion space. Prada, working already and selling digital fashion, you know, developing NFTs for digital fashion. And the superstar of the metaverse itself is Luxottica. So Ray-Ban. Ray-Ban is our partner. We are developing our suite of smart glasses, our suite of augmented reality glasses with Luxottica. And Luxottica is currently the most advanced metaverse hardware company there is. I mean, that is here in Italy, in Veneto. So we are living in the metaverse. And as you see from the examples that I bring, there's something else about the metaverse. It's not just real, even if at the early stages, it's also quite European. And it really figures and seems that there is an epicenter of metaverse development going on in Europe. And that's also why we as Meta think there's something going on. And we have decided to bring 10,000 metaverse engineering jobs to Europe, to continental Europe, because we want to tap into these talents. We want to tap into this affinity for design, impeccable design that there is. Because if the metaverse is a real reflection of the real three-dimensional world, well, we are quite good in doing and making stuff, making real things, beautiful things. So that is an absolute advantage that we potentially have over other regions, that we have these talents and these affinities. And it's not a given that it necessarily comes from the US, that it necessarily comes from China. And if you think, God, he's talking about these things and it's all dream, think about the beginning of mobile, of you guys who have been working in the telco business. I actually worked in the telco business for 20 years. We started off with the mobile internet and with Nokia and Ericsson and setting the standards, you know, setting the G standards that there are. That was ours. And then it was taken away and it moved to America to a large extent and was mass produced in China. So I think we can do this. But there's something else about Europe that I think is special. And you might giggle about this, but we have something that's quite unique, which is we have actually quite good regulatory frameworks. And frameworks that are multinational, that give the safety, that give the confidence, the trust, because if you have a new technology, you need trust into that. Otherwise, there's no adoption. And it also gives people like us investment certainty. We know what the frameworks are. We know what the rules of the game are. So many, many reasons why the metaverse is a good place to be started and to be built and to be potentially led from Europe. And it needs one more thing. And I think, again, that makes us special and makes us potentially different to other regions. We are not particularly competitive. And I have to explain what I mean with this. I mean, obviously, we're all competitive. This is not a reference to the World Cup, by the way. And that would be absolutely inappropriate to do this. But we are competitive, but we are not sort of closing off others. We are a region where we want to cooperate. And I want to talk about this cooperation, because one of the biggest cooperation partners in the ecosystem that we have are actually the infrastructure, the network players, the telco, the connectivity network players. And they have, we have a fantastic relationship with the telco partners because we play a very complementary role, if you think about this. So the telcos invest in the networks for their users, and we, as Meta and as many other digital content providers, we spend ourselves tens of billions into creating the systems, creating the platforms, the services, the content that then our users, the subscribers of the networks, they think that's extremely valuable. And that then allows the telco operators to monetize the investment that they've made. So it's a very, very symbiotic relationship. But we don't stop there. We also put billions into the infrastructure itself. We build data centers. We build interconnection points that bring the network much, much closer to the networks, to the users, to take the pressure off the telecoms networks. We build core infrastructure, like the submarine cables. We just this year in April landed one of the largest submarine cables in Genoa, in Italy, and in many other places in Europe. So that is our contribution to the metaverse, to the infrastructure. And thinking about the future, I mean, this is where we are today. Yeah, we start the whole cycle again. If you think about this, we are again now investing every year 10 billion euros into the development of the metaverse, the next platform, the next exciting thing, the thing that creates value for the users that then want to use the underlying infrastructure and pay for that, obviously, for this infrastructure, and then create value for the telco operators. And we partner with the telcos. We are quite interesting and maybe a bit controversial in this group that's talking about 5G and 6G. We have to talk about the technologies, the underlying technologies. And that's not just the mobile networks and the fiber networks, but it's actually Wi-Fi. Because the first application in the metaverse will be static. They will be at home. They will not be roaming around. So what we need to talk about is the right standards, the right capabilities, the right spectrum for Wi-Fi, for example. As nobody cares about Wi-Fi anymore, but that is actually the mobile, the over-the-air link that will be used predominantly at the first stage of the metaverse. We will have to talk about optimization of traffic. How do we make the most for the services, for the devices, for the networks itself? And that's not new. We're working with the telco partners on optimizing voice over IP, optimizing video, optimizing cloud. We will have to try, and we do that already. We need to optimize how immersive technologies are carried and transferred on the networks. And we're working in the so-called telecoms infrastructure partnership. There's a subgroup which deals with metaverse-ready networks. We work with Telecom Italia, with Telefonica, with Deutsche Telekom, with Microsoft to develop exactly these standards that we're ready for the future. But let me make one other point, because if you've been here for the last days, then you will have heard potentially also a slightly other story. And that's the big elephant in the room, which is the relationship that goes beyond between us and the telco operators. And there's this notion that the struggling telco operators need help. They need help, and they want subsidies from the tech operators. And coming from the telco industry, so I finished 5 years ago working as global policy director of Vodafone, I do know the balance sheet of telco operators. And I think in the last 5 years, they didn't get better. I think they got worse. And it was not a pretty picture back then. And there are real struggles of the telecom industry. There are real struggles. And I think there are three key struggles there are. The first one, again, controversial. There is a market structure that does not allow for recouping the investments that the operators make. And I think that has very much to do, and that's the controversial bit, with hyper competition. And not just the number of players and the kind of players that are in the market, but also the MVNOs and the fierce competition. And as a result, retail prices that are just unbelievable, where 5G is cheaper than 4G, although we all know that it's much more expensive to build than the other. So there is a structural problem here that the telco operators need to deal with. The second problem is the increased expectations of shareholders to receive ever more dividends. And then the last one is one that we share as well. It's just the macroeconomic climate. It is after the spike of COVID, we've all crash landed down on Earth. And as a result, telco networks actually grow slower now than they did before COVID. So that is a real problem, that actually the growth, the monetization growth, is currently actually tailing off rather than growing again. So there are real struggles. But is the answer imposing a tax on the content model and the content producers? Is that the right answer? I really don't think so. And to be very clear, when I was working in the telco world, I also thought that's not a very good idea. But it's quite obvious why it's not a good idea, because content is the cornerstone of the internet. content is a very key part that creates value in the internet. If you create a disincentive to create content, you create less value for the user, and you create less incentive for the user to actually spend for the connectivity that carries that content. So it's a very, very negative circle, and it's dangerous. And just don't take my word for it. I don't know, I assume you know what BEREC is. BEREC is the group of the European regulators. They looked into this issue, and they said, look, there's absolutely no imbalance between the content providers and the telcos. But if you change the system, it would cause irreparable harm to the current system of the internet that we know. So this is really a difficult situation that we're in, but we need to look forward, I think. We need to still find a solution of how we work together, because if we don't do this, we will not be able to reap the benefits of the next generation of the internet. And I do think that there is a big opportunity. And I think, to close off here, there are two more things that we need, apart from the cooperation. I think we also need to stop, or should not be complacent. We shouldn't say, oh, well, we are all extremely digital already, you know, we have all these connectivities, we have all these businesses that are digital. I think it's very, very dangerous if we sort of think we have reached the plateau of digitization. And then the last bit I think we need is that we should be a little bit more courageous, maybe a little bit more assertive of ourselves, and believe that we actually can take a leadership role this time around for the internet and harness the benefits of that. Thank you very much.